Friday, June 14th, 7:45 p.m. The room went silent. Every fork, every knife, every whisper in the restaurant froze in time. The only sound left was the arrogant chuckle of a man who had no idea he had just made the worst mistake of his life. The waiter, tall, blonde, and way too confident for someone wearing a name tag that read Chad, stood with his arms crossed, a smirk plastered across his face. He had just finished insulting an elderly black man sitting quietly at the corner table. "I don't know who you think you are, old man, but people like you don't belong in a place like this," Chad sneered. Morgan Freeman looked up slowly, his deep brown eyes locked onto the waiter, a calm but powerful presence radiating from him. And then, with a voice smoother than aged whiskey, he said, "You should probably check who signs your paycheck before running that mouth of yours." Boom! The words hit like a thunderclap. Chad's smirk twitched. His confidence cracked like a cheap porcelain plate. The other staff members gasped. Customers exchanged wide-eyed glances. The restaurant manager, a short, balding man named Greg, nearly dropped his clipboard. Because Morgan Freeman wasn't just another customer. He was the new owner of the restaurant. And Chad had just insulted the one person who could ruin his life in an instant. But before we get into what happened next, let's rewind a little back to how this all started. That evening, the Magnolia Room, a high-end restaurant in downtown Atlanta, was buzzing with life. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow, soft jazz played in the background, and rich folks in designer suits sipped on wine that cost more than a car payment. The place had a reputation. It wasn't just about the food, it was about status. The kind of place where people didn't just eat. They made business deals, showed off their wealth, and pretended they were more important than they really were. And Chad? Oh, he loved this environment. He wasn't just a waiter. He saw himself as a gatekeeper. The one who decided who deserved to eat there and who didn't. And if you didn't fit his idea of the right kind of customer, he made sure you felt it. So when an older black man in a simple brown jacket and a flat cap walked in and sat alone at a corner table, Chad had already made up his mind. This guy doesn't belong here, he mumbled under his breath, rolling his eyes as he grabbed a menu. Morgan Freeman, on the other hand, was completely unbothered. He had no entourage, no cameras following him. He wasn't wearing flashy jewelry or a three-piece suit. Just a regular man enjoying a quiet meal. At least, that's what Chad thought. Chad ignored Morgan at first. While other tables got their water refilled and their orders taken promptly, Morgan's menu sat untouched. Then, when he finally came over, Chad's tone was extra condescending. "You sure you can afford this place, sir?" he said, forcing a fake smile. "Our cheapest steak is $85, just so you know." Morgan raised an eyebrow, amused. "Is that so?" "Yeah," Chad continued. "Most of our customers are, well, regulars. We don't usually get people just wandering in." "People like me?" Morgan asked, a hint of something sharp in his voice. Chad just shrugged. "Hey, I'm just saying, if you're lost, there's a good diner down the street. More your type of place." A couple sitting nearby gasped. Another waiter, a young Latina woman named Rosa, clenched her fists. Even the bartender, polishing a glass behind the counter, shot Chad a look that said, "Dude, what the hell?" Morgan Freeman sighed and set down his menu. "Son," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight, "do you know who I am?" Chad snorted. "Should I?" That was it. That was the exact moment Chad's fate was sealed. Because Morgan Freeman leaned back, crossed his arms, and delivered the line that would haunt Chad for the rest of his career. "You should probably check who signs your paycheck before running that mouth of yours." And the entire restaurant lost it. Gasps. Murmurs. Someone in the back whispered, "Wait, what did he just say?" Greg, the restaurant manager, nearly choked on his gum. He knew. Oh, he knew exactly what Morgan was talking about. Chad's confidence wavered for the first time that night. "What do you mean?" he stammered. Morgan simply pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. Greg snatched it up, his eyes scanning the paper frantically. And then his face turned a shade of white that even a ghost would envy. Because at the top of that paper, in bold black letters, it read, "Ownership Transfer Agreement, the Magnolia Room." Signed. Dated. And at the bottom, the new owner's name. Morgan. Damn. Freeman. Chad's jaw hit the floor. His stomach twisted into a knot the size of Texas. He had just insulted the man who could fire him on the spot. And the worst part? Morgan wasn't done yet. For a long, agonizing second, nobody moved. The restaurant was frozen in time, stuck between two realities. One where Chad was an arrogant, untouchable waiter, and another where he had just insulted the new owner of the entire establishment. And reality had just slapped him in the face hard. His eyes darted from the paper to Morgan Freeman, then back to the paper, as if somehow, someway, the words would magically rearrange themselves and undo his colossal mistake. Greg, the manager, was sweating bullets. Rosa, the waitress, was biting her lip so hard it might start bleeding. The couple at the next table was loving this. They weren't even pretending to eat anymore. And Morgan? Morgan was just sitting there, arms crossed, watching Chad scramble for his life like a man who had walked straight into his own grave. Finally, Chad forced out a laugh. Fake, nervous, the kind of laugh a man does when he's desperately trying to rewind time. Ha, man. You got me. You got me real good, Chad said, his voice cracking. You're the new owner? No way. No way, man. That's crazy. Morgan just raised an eyebrow. Chad swallowed. I mean, of course I knew that. I was just messing with you, Mr. Freeman. You know, friendly teasing, right? You're a funny guy. I've seen your movies. Silence. The kind of silence that strips a man of his dignity. Then Morgan leaned in slightly. Tell me something, Chad, he said, his voice low and deliberate. Is that how you treat all of your customers? Chad opened his mouth, but no words came out. His brain was buffering, desperately trying to find an excuse. Morgan continued. Or was that just for me? The temperature in the room dropped. Chad knew what he was being asked, and he knew there was no right answer. If he said he treated everyone like that, he was an awful waiter who didn't deserve the job. If he admitted that it was just because Morgan was a black man in a fancy restaurant, well, that was even worse. Checkmate. Greg, the manager, finally snapped out of his trance and rushed forward, his face red. Mr. Freeman, I am so sorry. I had no idea this was happening. Chad, what the hell were you thinking? Chad looked like a deer caught in the headlights. His mouth flapped open and closed, but nothing came out. Greg turned back to Morgan, bowing slightly like a man begging for his paycheck to survive another day. I swear, sir, this does not reflect our restaurant's values. We would never tolerate. Morgan held up a hand, and Greg shut up instantly. I don't want your excuses, Morgan said. His voice wasn't angry. No yelling, no threats, just that smooth, even calmness. And somehow, that was even scarier. I want to know something, Morgan continued, shifting his gaze back to Chad. Why did you assume I didn't belong here? Chad gulped. Greg stepped in again. Mr. Freeman, please, allow me to comp your meal, your drinks, your entire night. We'll make this right. Morgan didn't even blink. Fire him. Boom. The words hit harder than a freight train. The restaurant gasped as if Morgan had just dropped a nuclear bomb in the middle of the dining room. Rosa actually covered her mouth. The couple next to them were full-on invested now, eyes darting between Morgan and Chad like this was a championship boxing match. And Chad? Chad looked like he had just been sentenced to life in prison. Greg hesitated. Sir, Fire him, Morgan repeated, his voice smooth as silk but absolute. Chad snapped out of his shock. Wait, what? No, come on. You can't do that. I didn't mean it. It was a joke. A misunderstanding. Morgan's face remained stone cold. You disrespected me in my own restaurant, he said. And I can only imagine how you treat people who don't have the power to fire you on the spot. Greg sighed and turned to Chad. Chad, he said, his voice tired. Give me your apron. No, wait, Greg, come on, man. Chad pleaded. I've been working here for 3 years. And you just lost it in 30 seconds. A long pause. Chad's breathing was shallow. He looked around, as if hoping someone would step in and save him. But the only looks he got were ones of disgust, disappointment, and from a few tables, pure satisfaction. Finally, Chad let out a shaky breath. He untied his apron, slapped it on the table, and stormed out of the restaurant. The doors slammed behind him. Silence. Then, Well, damn, that was from an old man at the bar, sipping a bourbon. And just like that, the restaurant busted out laughing. It was the kind of laugh that releases all the tension in a room. Servers chuckled behind the counter. Customers leaned back in their chairs, shaking their heads. Even Greg let out a nervous little, heh. But Morgan? Morgan wasn't laughing. He calmly picked up his fork, cut into his steak, and took a bite. Then, without looking up, he spoke. I'll take the check now. Greg nearly fainted. Sir, please, I said your meal is on the house. We would never. Morgan glanced up, giving him a look so sharp it could cut diamonds. I pay for what I eat, he said. Unlike some people, I don't take things that don't belong to me. Greg nodded so fast his neck almost snapped. Right, of course, Mr. Freeman. I'll get that right away. Morgan smiled. Good. And while you're at it, find Rosa here a better position. I like the way she carries herself. Rosa almost dropped her tray. Wait, what? Morgan took another bite. You're assistant manager now, he said casually. Congratulations. Greg, still flustered, nodded aggressively. Absolutely. Done. Consider it official. Rosa couldn't believe it. Her eyes were wide as saucers. The customers burst into applause. And as the night went on, everyone knew one thing for sure. Chad had made the biggest mistake of his life. But Rosa? She had just won the jackpot. Saturday, June 15th, 9:30 a.m. Chad was hungover. His head was pounding, his mouth was dry, and his bank account was empty. The events of last night played on repeat in his head like a bad movie. Every moment, every word, every damn look of satisfaction from those customers as he got thrown out on his ass. He had lost his job, and not just any job, his best-paying job, and it was all because of one stupid mistake. He groaned, burying his face in his pillow. This isn't happening. This isn't happening. But it was, because while he was lying in bed feeling sorry for himself, the world had already moved on. And Morgan Freeman? He was just getting started. Meanwhile, at the Magnolia Room, the morning crew arrived early, expecting a normal shift. They were wrong, because the second they stepped inside, they saw him, Morgan Freeman, sitting at the bar, reading the morning paper, like he'd been coming there for years. Greg, the manager, walked in right behind them, and the second he spotted Morgan, he nearly tripped over his own feet. Mr. Freeman, why, you're back, he stammered. Morgan didn't even look up. I own the place now, don't I? Greg gulped. Yes, of course. Absolutely. Morgan finally folded the newspaper and set it down. Good. Then let's talk about changes. Greg paled. See changes? Morgan turned to Rosa, who was standing by the counter, still looking like she couldn't believe she was assistant manager now. Rosa, tell me something, Morgan said. How long did you work under Chad? Rosa hesitated. About a year? And in that time, Morgan continued, how many customers did you see him disrespect? Rosa bit her lip. A lot. Morgan nodded. And how many times did management do anything about it? Rosa glanced at Greg. Greg turned the color of expired mayonnaise. I mean, we always tried to. Morgan held up a hand. Relax, he said. I'm not here to fire anyone else. Yet. Greg let out a visible sigh of relief. But then Morgan leaned in slightly. But I do have a few adjustments to make. Rosa leaned in too. Adjustments? Morgan smiled. Starting today, this restaurant's getting a makeover. And not just the menu. Greg blinked. Oh, are you thinking decor? Morgan chuckled. Nah, I'm thinking about the people. And just like that, the Magnolia Room's entire future changed. Chad tries to fight back. Across town, Chad was still in bed, scrolling through his phone, when he saw it. A news article. A damn news article. Fire Hollywood star Morgan Freeman takes over Atlanta restaurant. Speech Balloon, the legendary actor, has officially acquired the Magnolia Room and has already begun making big changes, starting with promoting longtime waitress Rosa Garcia to assistant manager. Sources say Freeman is focusing on creating a more inclusive and welcoming environment after a former waiter, who will remain unnamed, was let go due to discriminatory behavior. Chad sat up so fast he almost fell out of bed. What the hell? His name wasn't even mentioned, but everyone knew who they were talking about. His phone buzzed. A message from his old coworker, Jake. Mobile phone with arrow, bro. They're calling it the Chad incident now. You're trending. Chad's stomach dropped. He flipped to Twitter. And there it was. Fire hashtag the Chad incident fire. Top trending. Thousands of people were roasting him. Police Garlight, some dude really tried to disrespect Morgan Freeman and thought he'd get away with it? LMAO. Hashtag the Chad incident. Police Garlight, he really said people like you don't belong here. And Morgan Freeman owns the damn place. This is cinema. Police Garlight, RIP Chad's career. Hope he enjoys working the drive-thru. Hashtag the Chad incident. Chad's hands started shaking. His entire life was falling apart in real time. And worst of all, nobody felt bad for him. Back at the Magnolia Room, Morgan was walking through the restaurant, listening to Rosa explain how things had been run before. Chad used to treat customers like dirt, she said, especially anyone who didn't look rich enough. Morgan sighed. Not anymore. Rosa grinned. So, what's next, boss? Morgan chuckled. Next? He looked around. Customers were already pouring in, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Hollywood legend. Reporters were waiting outside, snapping photos. And inside, the restaurant felt different. Warmer, livelier, more welcoming. Morgan smiled. Next, he said, we turn this place into something better. And with that, the Magnolia Room was officially reborn. Sunday, June 16th, 6 p.m. The Magnolia Room was booming. Tables were full. The bar was packed. Even the outdoor seating, usually ignored, had people waiting just to get a spot. Why? Because everyone wanted to see the restaurant that Morgan Freeman now owned. The same restaurant where an arrogant waiter had crashed and burned. Inside, Rosa walked through the floor with newfound confidence. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the assistant manager. She had a new uniform, a new name tag, a new life, and she had earned it. But while Rosa was living her best life, Chad was having the worst weekend of his existence. Chad hits rock bottom. Sunday, 6:30 p.m. Chad stood outside the Magnolia Room, staring at his own downfall. Through the glass, he could see his replacement, some new waiter, smiling and actually treating customers with respect. His jaw clenched. Everything should have been fine. He should have still had his job, still had his reputation, still had his life. But instead, he was unemployed, broke, and worst of all, he was a walking meme because the Chad incident had gone beyond Twitter. It was on TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, even late-night TV. Microphone, a waiter insulted Morgan Freeman in his own restaurant. That's right, the man who played God. I don't know about you, but if Morgan Freeman owned my workplace, I'd be handing him free breadsticks for life. Late-night show host. Microphone, this dude really thought he could talk down to a customer. Bro, it's Morgan Freeman. The man could narrate your entire downfall and make it sound poetic. Viral TikTok. Chad gritted his teeth. This wasn't fair. This wasn't his fault. And that's when it hit him. He needed to fix this. He needed to talk to Morgan Freeman. Now, Chad pushed open the doors, storming inside. The second he stepped in, heads turned. People recognized him instantly. Whispers spread like wildfire. Is that him? That's the guy. No way he has the nerve to come back. Rosa spotted him first. She immediately stepped forward. Chad, what are you doing here? Chad ignored her, his eyes scanning the room. And then he saw him. Morgan Freeman, sitting in the corner. Calm, collected, untouchable. Chad marched up to him. We need to talk, he said, his voice shaking between anger and desperation. Morgan didn't even look up from his plate. Talking, he said, chewing his food. Go on. Chad hesitated. This wasn't how he expected the conversation to go. I just want to say this whole thing got blown out of proportion, Chad said. I didn't mean what I said that night. Morgan finally looked up. You didn't mean it? Chad nodded. Yeah, it was just a misunderstanding. You get that, right? Morgan put his fork down, and then he spoke. Son, he said, his voice low, if I hadn't owned this place, would you have apologized? Chad's stomach twisted. I mean, of course I would have. Morgan cut him off. No, you wouldn't have. Chad's mouth snapped shut. You see, that's the problem, Morgan continued. You didn't treat me differently because you misunderstood anything. You treated me differently because you thought I didn't matter. Chad's face burned. You thought I was just some random old black man who wandered into a place you believed he didn't belong, Morgan went on. And you treated me the way you've probably treated a lot of other people. The only difference, he leaned in slightly. This time you got caught. Chad clenched his fists. So what? That's it? My life's just over now. Morgan raised an eyebrow. That's up to you. Silence. Chad swallowed. What does that mean? Morgan leaned back, taking a sip of his drink. It means people aren't mad because you made a mistake. They're mad because you never learned from it, he said. You've had 2 whole days to think about what happened. And instead of reflecting, instead of realizing why people are angry, you're still here making excuses. Chad flinched. You don't want to fix yourself, Morgan continued. You just want to fix your reputation. Chad had no response. For the first time, he realized Morgan was right. Morgan let out a small sigh. Look, son, you're young. You messed up, but life isn't over. Chad's ears perked up. Morgan continued. But if you keep blaming everyone but yourself? If you keep pretending like none of this was your fault? Morgan picked up his fork again. Then yeah, you're done. Chad stood there. For the first time in a long time, he had nothing to say. A minute later, Chad walked out of the Magnolia room. This time, it wasn't with anger, or bitterness, or arrogance. It was with realization. Maybe this wasn't the end of his life, but it was the end of the person he used to be. Inside, Morgan Freeman smiled to himself. He had seen it before. People who make mistakes, people who fall, people who hit rock bottom. Some never change, but some learn. And sometimes all it takes is one good lesson,